All right, we are live. Good evening and welcome to Mishnah Mastery. To the thousands tuning in on Zoom and to the millions watching at home, we do hope you will enjoy the show. We are going to be kicking off tonight with chapter 11 of Masechet Shabbat in the Mishnah. That's all right. You just slam whatever doors you like. So that's where we're up to, and we are going to get the screen share going so that people can see it. And to Jeff and Mark, who will see this a little later on, sorry that you couldn't make it tonight. We sure do miss you, but life goes on, doesn't it? And we've got Mishnayos to finish. So there we go. And in the days approaching Matan Torah, we should be trying to learn as much as we possibly can. So here we go. Chapter 11. Has everyone got it on their screens?
Yeah.
Beautiful. So chapter 11 is going to deal with throwing. We've been talking, if you recall, about transferring items from one domain to another domain. So in our minds, we can picture that. You're carrying an item from one place to the next, and you have therefore violated the malacha of hotza'ah. What about if you are throwing from one domain to the other? What is the story over there? So the Mishnah says as follows: Hazorek mirishus hayachid lirishus harabim. A person who throws an item from the private domain, such as a house, for example, lirishus harabim, into the public domain, like the street, for example. Or merishus harabim lirishus hayachid, or they throw from the public domain to the private domain, chayav. The Mishnah says you are liable. Meaning, if you have done this b'shogeg, if you've done this by accident, then you will be chayav korban. And if you did it on purpose, then that's not a very good situation at all to be in. So that is how the Mishnah commences. Now you'll remember that we've talked about other domains, such as a Carmelis and a Makom Patur, and all these different types of things. But we had said that the true violation of the Malacha is to go from public space to private space, or vice versa. So that is what is needed to be able to violate and to be chayav for throwing something. Now, that's all well and good. But there's a rule when it comes to the public domain, which is there's always like these side rules, like, but now the bit that we didn't tell you. So a public domain is only considered a public domain for the first 10 tfachim of airspace. Ooh. So 10 tfachim of airspace, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, however many that is considered the airspace of the Rishus Rabbin, the public domain. So if it passes within that airspace, then we'll see how the variety of opinions would adjudicate in the different instances. Okay, so the Mishnah reads as follows: Merishus hayachid lirishus hayachid. If you throw from one private domain to another private domain, but rishus harabim ba'emtza, but the public domain lies in between, then we see that there is a machlokes. Rabbi Akiva machayev. Rabbi Akiva says that you would be chayev, and the chachamim would say you are patur. Now we have to understand, we're throwing from one private domain to another private domain. So we're not changing domain in the same way that we've been talking about, of a public to a private or a private to a public. So we're trying to work out over here, what if you're throwing into two private domains, but there is an airspace of Rishus Harabim in between. Yeah, so you've got one house on one side of the alley, you've got another house on the other side of the alley, and you're throwing from one to the other, and you've got the public domain in between, but only for 10 tefachim. Above 10 tefachim, that airspace is considered a makom patur, a kind of exempt zone, let's call it. So it's going to depend on where it is going in between. If you recall, I'm doing such a great job of explaining this. This is brilliant. If you recall, we had said that in order to violate the malacha, you have to have akira and hanacha. It has to leave a place and it has to land in a place for it to be considered. The violation of the malacha. So, if it passes within the airspace, there is no landing. There is no hanacha in the Rishus Harabim, which is why the Chachamim would say that you are not chayav because you have not rested the item in the Rishus Harabim because it's just flying through the air. It hasn't physically rested there, and therefore it is not a violation of the malacha. However, according to Rabbi Akiva, something passing through the air, it would be as if it has stopped in the Rishus Harabim, and that is why Rabbi Akiva would say that you are chayav. It all depends. That the crux of this machlokes is whether something passing through the airspace could be considered to have rested in that airspace or not, even if it's just flying through the air. And it would seem that according to Rabbi Akiva, he holds that it does, and that is why he would hold it is chayav, and that is why the Chachamim would say that it is patur. He is exempt because he has not done that. But now in Mishnah base, we're going to start trying to define what the scenario actually looks like. Okay, so that's where we're at. We read the words as follows: Ketzad. How is this working? Asks the Mishnah. So the Mishnah answers: Shtei gazuz traos zot keneged zot v'rishus harabim. You've got two balconies, let's call them, two porch things, two balconies. I think that's the best way of translating them. Is that what we've got there? Yeah, two balconies. All right, and they're on either side of a rishus harabim. So the Mishnah says as follows: Hamoshit for hazorek nizot lazor patur. If one throws an article, an item, or if one passes over, reaches over with an item from one to the other, says the Mishnah, you would be patur. Why? Because it would seem that you are above the airspace of the Rishus Harabim, and so you would not be violating the malacha according to the Chachamim. All right. Hayushteihem b'dyuta achas. However, if both of these balconies are on the same side of the public domain, so then the Mishnah says, Hamoshit chayav, one who reaches over and passes an item would be chayav, whereas one who throws the item would be exempt. So that is if they are on the same side. Why? Well, the Mishnah answers, Shekach haisa avodas halavim, because that was how the Levites would perform the process of passing one beam to another when they were traveling along with beams on their wagons and things like this. So we have to remember, we're always concerned about how the Levites performed malacha with regards to the Mishkan. Yeah, so it would seem that they would have been kind of one behind the other traveling and passing one beam to another, and that would have been how they did it, and that is why, according to the Mishnah, if you are on the same side, you are, so to speak, reenacting the way that the Levites would have done it, and therefore you would be chayav. So that's why we have the next clause in the Mishnah, which is Shtei agalos zo achazor b'rishus harabim. You've got two wagons that are tailing behind each other. They're going in a line, one in front of the other. Moshitin akrashim mizolazo aval lo zorkin. They would pass the boards, or they would pass the beams from one to the other. Aval lo zorkin, but they did not throw the beams from one to the other. So that is why the halacha is, as the Mishnah identifies it over here, that if you are on the same side of the street and you are passing over, you will be chayav. But if you were throwing, then you would be patur. Continues the Mishnah. What about situations where halachically it is a rishus hayachid? It just doesn't look like a rishus hayachid. It's not a house. It's something else. So the Mishnah says, Chulias habor. if you have a hole, if you have a pit, and that pit is halakhically a private domain. Why would it be a private domain? The reason is because all you need to do, all you need to have to be considered a private domain is it needs to have 4 mechitzas, 4 walls, and it has to be 10 tefachim deep, and the hole will have to be 4 by 4 amot squared. So if you have a hole that fits those dimensions, that is halakhically a reshus hayachid. So chulias habor, a ditch or pit in the street. Or similarly, if you've got a huge rock that is 4 by 4 amot in surface area and 10 tefachim tall, so then we see the following: hanotel mehen v'hanoset al gaban chayav. That if you pass something to or from this different domain, be it the pit, be it the rock, whatever it is, if you pass between the two, then you are halakhically passing between a public domain and a private domain, and that's why the Mishnah says chayav, you would be liable. Pachot mikain, if it was smaller than these dimensions, then patur, it would not be considered a separate. It would not be considered a separate reshus hayachid. It might be considered a carmelit, which we have talked about in the past. It might be makom patur, but in both of those instances, carrying between a public domain and one of those other varieties of domains, you would not be chayav, says the Mishnah, you would be patur. Continues the Mishnah in Mishnah Gimel. What about if something lands on the side of a wall? Ooh, what's the situation over there? If it lands, let's say, on the wall of a private domain, what is the situation? Hazorik arba amos bakosa. If somebody throws an item 4 amos and it lands on a wall, so the Mishnah says lemala me'asara tefachim. If it hits the wall at a point which is higher than 10 tefachim, then the Mishnah says kazorek ba'avir. Then it's as if you have thrown it in the air. And if you've thrown it in the air and it's above 10 tefachim, then you are exempt because it's not been within the airspace of reshus hayachid, reshus harabim, the public domain. Lemata me'asar tefachim. If it lands on a part of the wall which is lower than 10 tefachim off the ground, then the Mishnah says kazorek ba'aretz. It is as if you have thrown it along the ground, in which case you would be chayav, you would be liable. Hazorek ba'aretz. If you throw it on the land, arba amos, if you throw it along the ground, 4 amos, Mishnah says chayav. Now this is obvious to those that know at least, but the Mishnah is clarifying it anyway, just for the sake of stylistic consistency. But that would be the din in the Mishnah. If a person was to throw an item 4 amos along the ground within the airspace of the reshus harabim, then they would be chayav. Says the Mishnah, zarik l'toch arba amos. Now, what if you throw it, but your aim is to throw it less than 4 amos? Ooh, if you're only violating the malacha by throwing it longer than 4 amos, then what if you're planning to throw it less than 4 amos? Would you be chayav? Says the Mishnah, Zark l'toch arba amos. You throw it to within arba amos, but the nisgalgal chutz la'arba amos, but it then rolls. So you throw it 3 amos, 3 cubits as it translates there. And then it rolls an extra cubit, and it is now rolling beyond 4 amos. What do you think? Do you think it would be chayav, or do you think it would be pater? Says the Mishnah, pater. You would be exempt. Why? Because you need to have. Have we talked about it here? Did we talk about it in Daf Yomi? You need to have meleches machsheves. You need to have at least some kavanah that was what you were intending to do. You were not intending to throw it more than 4 feet. Let's call it for argument's sake. 4 amos, you were only intending to throw it 3 feet. So because your mind was not intending to do the malacha, says the Mishnah, you would be patur, you would be exempt. Chutz la'arba amos, if you had planned to throw it more than 4 amos, then it's galgal l'toch arba amos, but it kind of rolled, but you put a bit of backspin on it. So it went out of 4 amos, but then it rolled back in. Says the Mishnah, chayav, you would be liable, even though the end point was within a permitted distance, because your mind had always intended for it to go beyond 4 amos, the Mishnah says you are chayav and you have violated the melacha. We move on, ladies and gentlemen, to Mishnah Dalet. Mishnah Dalet, throwing things in the water, in the sea. Sea, S-E-E. So a sea is considered a karmelis, which is why we encounter the following halacha. Hazorik bayam, if you throw an item when you are in the sea, and you throw it arba amos, you throw it 4 cubits, 6 feet, says the Mishnah Patur, you are exempt. Why? Because you've only thrown an item in a karmelis. You have not thrown an item in a public domain, so you would not be chayav. Says the Mishnah, Im haya rakak mayim, if there was a puddle of water, u'reshus harabim ma'aleches bo, and a public space, public path was going through this puddle, says the Mishnah, hazorik l'socher arba amos chayav. Then, if you were to throw an item 4 amos or more, then you would be chayav. There is a clarification over here. We do have to assume that the puddle is less than 10 tefachim deep, because if it was more than 10 tefachim deep, it would be considered a different type of domain, and it wouldn't be considered a public domain. So we have to be assuming that we are dealing with a puddle that is less than 10 tefachim deep. So if you were to throw an item 4 amos or more, then you would be chayav. The kamahu rakak hamayim. How big should this puddle be? How deep should it be? Oh, there we go. That's why I had it in my notes. Pachos me'asar tefachim, less than 10 tefachim. Because if it was more than that, it would be a different domain. Rakak mayim, ureshus harabim ma'aleches bo, you've got a puddle of water and the public path is going through it. Hazorik b'socho arba amos. So 1 second, I have probably, before we have been talking about throwing an object into it, and the other, I assume, would be you are in the puddle and you are throwing an item 4 amos. So if you are in the puddle of water and it is and a public domain is passing through it, then the person who throws into the puddle 4 amos, he will be liable. He will be chayav. Mishnah Hay, says Mishnah Hay. Where is Mishnah Hay? Here we go. Hazorik min hayam la yabasha. A person who throws, he's in the sea, so he's throwing from the sea onto dry land. Or umin hayabasha la yam, or he is on dry land throwing into the sea. Now remember we said that a sea is a karmelis. It is not a strict public domain. Umin hayam la sfina, or from the sea onto a boat, and the boat would be a private domain. Umin hasfina la yam, or from the boat into the sea. Umin hasfina la chaverta, or from one boat to another boat, says the Mishnah, patur, because you have not violated public domain to private domain, or private domain to public domain. You have not achieved that, and therefore you would not be chayav. Sfinos kshuros zobazo, if you have 2 boats that are tied together, says the Mishnah, metaltalim zobazo, then you can carry from one to the other. Imeinon kshuros, however, if they are not tied together, afal pi shemukafos, even though they might be so close together that they are touching, says the Mishnah, you are not allowed to transfer from one to the other. You cannot carry in between. Says the Mishnah in Mishnah Vav, in Mishnah 6. So by way of understanding Mishnah Vav, we can say the following. In order to be chayav, in order to violate the melacha, either intentionally or inadvertently, mindlessly, then you need to be in the same state of mind throughout the whole melacha. Meaning, if you wanted to violate the melacha intentionally, so then you would have to have the intention beforehand that you knew you were going to violate the melacha, and at the end of the process, you would also have to have been intending for it to happen. Or if you wanted to do it inadvertently, not if you wanted to do it inadvertently, but if you didn't know at the beginning of the melacha that what you were doing was wrong, but then you found out sometime in the middle of it, before the melacha was completed, that you were not allowed to be doing this, then there would be a lapse in your mindlessness, and you would not be obligated to bring a korban, a sacrifice. Okay, now for some things that can be quite straightforward if it's a long process, but what about if you are throwing something? Throwing things usually does not take that long. And so that is why we encounter the following halacha in Mishnah Vav. Hazorek, a person who throws an item, v'nizkar la'achar sheyatzasa miyado, and he remembers, as soon as it leaves his hand, he remembers it. He remembers that it's Shabbos and he's not supposed to be doing what he's doing. So hazorek v'nizkar la'achar sheyatzasa miyado, it leaves his hand and he suddenly remembers. Plata acher, if a person was to catch it, plata kelev, or a dog was to catch it, or shenisrafo, where it spontaneously combusts in mid-air, such that there is not a complete process taking place of leaving one domain and landing in another domain, the Mishnah says patur, the person would be exempt, he would be not liable. Zarak la asos chabura, if a person, when he threw an item, was planning to wound someone, bein ba'adam, bein ba'behema, whether he was intending to wound a person or an animal, v'nizkar ad shelo nases chabura, and he remembers that what he was doing was not appropriate for Shabbos, and he remembers that before the item hits and causes the wound, says the Mishnah, patur, the person would be exempt. Zeh haklal, this is the rule, says the Mishnah. Kol chayvei chataos, anybody who should be liable for a sin offering, for violating a malacha unintentionally, they will not be liable unless the beginning of the process and the end of the process had all taken place with the when he was unaware that he shouldn't be doing what he was doing. If he started the malacha b'shogeg, if he did it by accident, but he realizes midway through that he is not supposed to be doing what he's doing. So sofan zadon, the end of the malacha is intentional. Or says the Mishnah, tchilasan zadon v'sofa shgaga. He starts off intentionally and somehow midway he forgets that it's Shabbos. And so when it lands, he is no longer thinking that he has done a malacha. Then the Mishnah says, paturid, you would be exempt. Why? Because the rule is ad shetehei tchilasan v'sofan shgaga, until the beginning and the end have both been accomplished unintentionally or intentionally, depending on how you've done it. Mazel tov on completing chapter 11. And now we move on to chapter 12. And it's going to get a lot more diverse now, ladies and gentlemen. We are going to be looking at a lot of different malachos and how much of different actions a person would need to do before they are in violation. So, says the Mishnah, Haboneh, a person who builds something. Kama yivnevi heichaya. How much should they be building in order to be liable? So the Mishnah says, kol shehu, any amount. Haboneh kol shehu. A person who builds any amount would be chayav. How much is any amount? Any amount means any amount. Says the Mishnah, v'hamastates, if a person is smoothing a jagged stone. Translates it there as chisels. Very good. V'hamakeh b'patish, or a person who strikes with a hammer. So we do have a malacha called makeh b'patish, which is where you are finishing off a process or finishing off creating something. But this is also literally understood as someone who is literally striking with a hammer in order to chip away at something. Uvamatzad, or a person who is chiseling or boring a hole of any size. Says the Mishnah, oh no, that's the next bit. Uvamatzad is striking something with an axe. Hakodeach, drilling a hole of any kind. Says the Mishnah, Kolshu, if you have done any amount of these things, chayav, you will be liable. Says the Mishnah, Ze'achlal, this is the general rule. Kola os malacha, umalachto miskayemes b'Shabbos. If you do a malacha and you intend for the work to endure, to be viable, sustainable, permanent. So in all of those types of instances, the Mishnah says you'll be chayav. Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel Omer, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says, Afa maker b'kurnas al hasadan b'shas malacha chayav. Even a person who strikes with a hammer on an anvil, b'shas malacha, at the time of his work, chayav, is going to be liable. Mipnei shehu kamisakim melacha, because he is as one who is improving his work. Meaning, if you were striking a hammer on the anvil, if it was on a smooth surface and the purpose was to remove any blemishes in the surface of the hammer, then according to Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, you would be chayav even for that, because you are improving the tool to be able to continue working further. So even in that instance, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel would say that you are liable. Continues the Mishnah in Mishnah base. Hachoresh, a person who plows. How much do you have to plow? Says the Mishnah, kol shehu, any amount. Hamnakesh v'amekarsein v'amezared kol shehu, a person who prunes trees. A person who is cutting down weeds. A person who is pruning trees, cutting away the dry leaves. A person who is cutting off young shoots in order to help them grow better, says the Mishnah, kol shehu chayav. If you do this in any amount, you will be chayav. Hamalaket eitzim, a person who gathers wood. Im latakein kol shehein. If you're doing it to be able to improve the space around you, then any amount would warrant liability. Im lahasik. If you are gathering these branches because you wish to burn them, then there's a different shi'ur, there's a different measurement, which is kadei levashel beit sakala. It's enough wood to be able to fuel a fire that would cook a light egg, or to, if not to boil a light egg, then to lightly boil an egg. Continues the Mishnah, Hamalaket asavim, if a person is collecting grass. Im letakein, if it's to fix the area, to make an improvement to the area, says the Mishnah, kol shehu, then it will be any amount. Im labehema, if you're doing it to be able to feed an animal, then the Mishnah says, kimlo piyagdi, and it's enough to be able to feed one mouthful for a goat, or a kid goat. That is how much the Mishnah says, and we actually saw that amount as well when it came to carrying these items. Last chapter, or the chapter before that, maybe even two. Recently, we saw it very, very recently. Says the Mishnah in Mishnah Gimel, Hakosev shtei osios, a person who writes two letters, bein bimino, bein bismola, whether he is right-handed and writes with his right hand, whether he is right-handed and writes with his left hand, whether he is left-handed and writes with his right hand, or whether he is right-handed and writes with his left hand, bein mishem echad, bein mishnei shemos, whether he is writing whether the same letter or two different letters, okay? Bein mishnei samamanios, even if it is with two different colors, b'chol lashon, two different languages, any language, it doesn't matter if you've written two letters, says the Mishnah, chayav, you will be chayav. Amar Rabbi Yossi says, lo chivu shtei osios ela mishum roshem, that the problem of writing two letters is because you leave an impression, you leave a mark. Because that is what they used to do to the boards, to the beams of the Mishkan. In order to be able to identify which beam connected with the next one, they would write Aleph, Base, Gimel, whatever it would be, so that they would know what order the beams would have to be connected in. So that was how they did it in the time of the Mishkan. Leida'ezehu ben Zugah. So in order to know which piece it should slot into. So with that in mind, it means a couple of things. According to Rabbi Yossi, it would mean that that any kind of impression that you are making, even if it's just a symbol, even if it's not necessarily a letter or a language that bears any relevance, but since the purpose of doing it in the Mishkan was to be able to identify things, according to him, if you were to write something in an identifiable way at all, then you would be chayav, according to him. Amar Rabbi says, kind of in between, Matzinu shem katan mishem gadol, that if you were to write a word, a legitimate word, which was forming part of a longer word or a longer name. So, for example, you write Shem, Shin Mem, but you had been planning to write Shimon or Shmuel. Similarly, if you write Noach, but you were planning to write Nahor or Don, hey, you write Don, and you were planning to write Doniel. Or Gad, you write Gad, and you were planning to write Gadiel. So according to Rabbi Yehuda, since you are writing words that can be recognized, and they are real words, even though you're planning to write something longer, according to Rebbe, you would be chayav. So it would seem that we have three different opinions, three different shitas. We have the Tanna Kama, we have the original opinion in the Mishnah, which is talking about any letters of the alphabet, of any alphabet, any language. Doesn't matter what you've done, but you've written two letters. So according to the Tanna Kama, you are going to be chayav. You had Rabbi Yossi, who says that even if you do two recognizable symbols, you're going to be chayav. And then you have the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda Anasi, who seems to say that if you are writing real words, then it's going to be a problem. Even if those words were meant to be part of longer words, the two letters that you have written make a real word, and therefore you would be chayav. But if it didn't make a real word, it would seem then, according to Rabbi Yehuda, you would be patur. So that is Mishnah Gimel. Continues with Mishnah Dalet. Mishnah Dalet. Hakosef shtei otios v'helem echad chayav. A person who writes two letters in one lapse of awareness, he or unawareness, he will be chayav. Continues the Mishnah. Kasav b'dio. If you write with ink, basam, which translates there as arsenic, but it's another kind of ground up powder mixed with a solution to make it into a type of ink. The sikra is a red paint or dye, translated there as red chalk. Bakumus, a plant extract, which translates it there as gum. Uvakankantum, which is a, what on earth have I written there? It seems to be a copper-based solution. There you go, sulfate of copper. Uvachol davar shehu roshem, or anything that is going to leave a permanent mark. So that might exclude, people that just kind of write in the air, or they talk in the Gemara about, writing on a window where you're just kind of clearing the space in the condensation on the window. So we are talking about things here which leave a mark of permanence. Continues the Mishnah. Al shtei kasle savios. Even if you are writing on two corners of a wall. I don't know why I'm turning and pointing to my corner. You might not be able to see it. But, you've got a corner like that, so you're writing one on that part of the corner, that one on that part of the corner, so it's not a continued flat surface, but you're writing in a corner. Continues the Mishnah, or you're writing on two boards, there you go, two leaves of a ledger, and they are connected to each other, they are side by side. Says the Mishnah, chayav, you will be chayav. Continues the Mishnah, hakosev al basaro, you're writing on your flesh, chayav, you would be liable. Hamasaret al basaro, one who scratches a mark on his skin. Rabbi Eliezer mechayev chatas, Rabbi Yehoshua potes. And then we have a machlokes. Rabbi Eliezer says you would be chayav, and Rabbi Yehoshua would say you are exempt. Why does it say the sages there? That's interesting. I don't know why. So Rabbi Eliezer has the stronger, the more strict opinion that if you are making this mark on your flesh, even though it will go away, we're not necessarily talking about taking out a knife properly, or tattooing onto your skin. We're not necessarily talking about that, but just going like Nick was here, scratching that into your arm. That would be what we're talking about over there. So then, as we see, there's a difference in opinion. According to Rabbi Eliezer, he would say very strictly that you are chayav, but Rabbi Yehoshua would say patur. Says the Mishnah in Mishnah Vav. No, what Mishnah are we on? Mishnah Hey. Sorry, couldn't tell the difference between a 5 and a 6 on my page. Continues the Mishnah. Kasav b'mashkin. If you are writing in fruit, with liquids. Sorry, if you're writing with liquids, so they're not necessarily going to be so not congealed, but ink is quite contained in its viscosity. What's that?
Stain.
Stain? Not quite the word I'm looking for. Liquids are kind of runny, and ink is more gloopy.
Solid.
Yeah. What does viscous mean?
Tell you in a second.
Anyone? Definition of viscous?
Definition.
Hey Siri, define viscous.
Having a thick, sticky consistency.
Yes.
There we go.
There's a thickness to it.
Thank you. So ink has a stronger viscosity. I'll be quiet, Siri. So ink has a stronger viscosity than other liquids would. So they're a bit more runny, a bit less permanent. So kasav b'mashkin or b'mei peros, or you write with fruit juice. Ba'avak drachim, or you write with dust. Anybody? Dust. Ba'avak hasofrin, or you write with avak sofrin. What's that going to be, like chalk powder maybe? Is that how it turns out? Writer's powder. With a chol davar she'eino miskayim, or anything that doesn't have permanence, patur, then you're going to be patur. La'achar yado, if you write with the back of your hand, so you're using the pen in an unusual fashion. Baraglo, or you're writing with your foot. Befib, or you're writing with your mouth. Uvamarpika, or you're writing with your elbow. I mean, these are phenomenal achievements. But the point here is that you are writing in an unusual fashion. Kasaf os achas samuch l'ksav, or you are writing a letter that is near other letters. Or kasav al gabei kasav, or you are writing on top of other letters. Niskaven lichtov ches, you're planning to write a chet, but you wrote the kasav shnei zayin, or you wrote two letter zayins, because if you have a look at the way in which a Sefer Torah is written, in fact, this is definitely going to have a picture here. What chapter are we on? Chapter 12. Yeah, there you go. So you were planning to write a chet, which really, when in Sophrus, what can I think? In the way that you write in a Sefer Torah, so a chet is just two zayins with a bridge. So that is where the Mishnah is coming from. That's how you write a chet in the Torah. So you were planning to write a chet, which is one letter, but you wrote two zayins, which is two letters. Echad ba'aretz ve'echad b'korah. Whether you are writing one letter on the ground and one on a beam, kasav al shtei katlei habayis, or you're writing on two separate walls, not necessarily close to each other on the corner, but actually on two separate walls, two separate spaces. Al shnei dapei pinkas, or on two separate pages. And they're not together, they're not read together, then the Mishnah says patur, because you have to be writing two letters and you have to be writing them close together. We talked about meleches machshavas, so you have to have the intention to write two letters. So if you're intending to write a chet and you ended up writing two zayins, in all of these instances that we've seen, you're going to be patur. Kosaf os achas notrikon, if you write a letter which is meant as an abbreviation, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Baseira Machayev v'chachamim potrin. Then Rabbi Yehuda, what did I just say? Rabbi Yehoshua ben Baseira would say chayev. Why? Because the abbreviation is meant as an actual word. So you're writing it in a way that someone would read it as the word. They're not going to read it just as an abbreviated letter. They're going to understand the context and they're going to understand what it meant. So, for example, sometimes when we write, Rav El Chanan, we might do Reish apostrophe. Right? And then we all know it means Rav. No one's going to read it and go, Reish El Chanan, who's that? Right? So if you're writing a letter as an abbreviation and everyone's going to understand the meaning, so then Rabbi Yehoshua ben Baseira would say Chayev, but Chachamim would say Patur. And the reason is because you haven't written two letters, according to the Chachamim. However much you might think that it's understandable, you haven't violated the Malacha in that way to be Chayev. Says the Mishnah in Mishnah Vav, if you write two letters and you write them in two lapses of awareness, so the Mishnah says, you write one letter in the morning and one letter later in the day, Rabban Gamliel Machayev, Rabban Gamliel is going to hold the person liable, the Chachamim poaching, but the Chachamim are not. According to Rabban Gamliel, the two lapses are going to link together, but according to the Chachamim, it is considered two separate melachot, and on neither occasion did you do enough to violate the melachas, and so according to the Chachamim, you're going to be patur, you're going to be exempt. Mazel tov on completing chapter 12, Perek Yud Beis of Maseches Shabbos, and that's all we've got time for. Tune in next week for the exciting world of chapter 13.